This is Marion Martin. Today is July 21st, 1988. I'm interviewing Isabel Steinschneider Mayall for the Hastings Waterfront Oral History Project. We're sitting in the studio of the Cropsey House on Washington Avenue. Isabel, when were you born?
I was born in this house upstairs in April 8th, 1911.
Did your mother have a doctor deliver you? Do you remember hearing about it?
And they thought that I was a blue baby and that I wouldn't live.
Oh, what was the doctor's name?
I don't remember.
Oh. Tell me about your family. There was
Which
your
family?
mother. Well, there was your mother. Your family here. When you were growing up.
I have an older brother.
And his name?
Lawrence. And my sister, Constance, older sister. And myself, and Barbara, and Bea and Barbara.
When was Lawrence born? Do you remember?
1905, I think.
And Constance?
1908.
And you were 1911. And then?
And Bea was 1922. I don't know. You have to get it to.
Okay.
for-
And then
yeah.
Barbara was?
3 years later.
Right.
They're in their 20s. I think it's 20 and 23, but I'm not too sure.
And just tell me a little bit about your family. I'm going to pretend like I know nothing about your ancestors. When did your family first come to Hastings? That would have been your great-grandfather, I guess. Approximately.
That's awful. I have
Good.
such a bad memory for these things.
Well, who was your great-grandfather?
Jasper Cropsey, the artist, Hudson River School. And he built, he was an architect before he was an artist, and he built the studio room onto the little Gothic cottage. And the house was built in 1825. And then this studio was built a short time after that. He had a studio further north in New York State, but there had been a fire, and then they came to live in Hastings. The exact date, maybe you better check with Bea.
Sure. And
It's on record somewhere.
so that was your great-grandfather. And then your grandparents? They didn't really live here very much, did they?
My mother had a sister, and Constance. My mother's name was Isabel. I'm named from her, and my sister was named for Aunt Connie. And they lived here for a while. Then she had two children, a boy and a girl, twins. Everett, Meade, and the name will come back.
Who had the children, Everett?
Aunt Connie.
This is your mother's sister.
Yeah.
And your mother's mother.
My mother's mother.
I think perhaps she died young, I'm not sure, but we might have information about that in the files.
I'm sure you do.
Mhm.
I'm sure
You don't
do.
remember hearing about your mother's mother when you were growing up?
Well, I don't. If I do, I don't remember the connection because, kids don't
Sure.
listen too well when they're younger.
Sure.
But now that was Cropsey's wife.
And her first name was? Started with an M.
You've got it.
Yeah, we've got her name.
Not
Mariba or something like that. Yeah, it's terrible. I can't remember either. Mariah. That's right. Such an
And
unusual name.
she was a coolie, and she came from a place in New Jersey, across the river.
Right. Greenwood Lake, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. That's why we always went swimming out there and spent summers on the lake.
Oh,
And
when
my
you were
brother-
growing up, you
brother
did.
and Connie and me.
Now, your mother, she grew up in this house, didn't she?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, she was a child when she came here because she and her sister,
Constance?
Connie, was, they lost their parents in a train accident.
Mm-hmm.
So they were sent east to be brought up by Jasper Cropsey, who was the only living relation.
Mm-hmm.
And they were maybe age 4 and 6, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the only house they ever knew,
Right.
until they got married and moved out.
Mm-hmm. Now, when your mother got married, did she move out for very long? Because then...
No. She stayed here. Auntie moved out.
Mm-hmm.
She went to Chicago, got married, and went to Chicago to live. And Jean is the twin of the boy.
Everett's twin. Constance's children. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We'd go and visit them out in Chicago, but they didn't come here to live.
Mm-hmm.
And Mother lived her whole life here.
Mm-hmm.
So, it was a long life because she was only about, as I say, 4 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
Auntie was older.
Right. Now, I don't have the date here of when your mother was born. Do you remember when your mother was born? Or do you remember how old she was when she died? Because we know she died in 1958.
I think she was either 77 or 78.
Uh-huh.
She was born in San Francisco, 18,
Must have been about 1880.
was 81 or around there.
Mm-hmm. Because we do have a record, as we told you, that she joined the First Reformed Church in 1894.
Yeah.
So she would have been 14
It
years
was
old then.
confirmed then, yeah, that's about right.
Right.
So that makes it then 1881?
About, yeah.
2 or 1.
Uh-huh. And she came here when she was 4 or 5, so that was about the mid-1880s.
Well, now I say 4 or 5 because that's what I think I was told, but again, kids don't really listen.
Mm-hmm. So then when she grew up and she got married, did she live here after she got married? Because both her grandparents would have passed away.
Married here.
She was married in the house.
Yes,
Uh-huh.
and so was Dee, and so was I.
Oh.
Connie was too.
Mm-hmm.
We all loved the studio, and this is as beautiful as any cathedral.
Yes, and the ceremony was right in here.
Yeah, and one window there and the north window, either or at the time.
Do you have a photograph of that?
I don't think so.
It would be wonderful to have a photograph of one of those weddings.
Well, Connie must have,
Uh-huh.
or
We'll
rather
have
her
to-
family. You have to ask Ped.
Mm-hmm.
He should have it, Connie's wedding.
Ped would be her
son.
son, Everett.
Eldest son. No, no.
No, that
Paul.
was, I'm sorry. All
Paul
right.
Doxey.
Right.
Ped spells the initials of his name.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Eaton Doxey is
Right.
Ped's name.
And he might have a photograph of
He
his
should
mother's
have it.
wedding.
He should have it.
Uh-huh.
Used to be in there on the, they changed it. Used to be in on the desk.
Right. Now, your mother, do you remember when your mother got married?
Couldn't.
I mean, just wondered if you remembered hearing about it, but...
I was too young.
Mm-hmm. Well, she was married twice, is that right?
No, wait a minute. I might be wrong. I might be wrong in this. Maybe she was married in New York. There should be a record somewhere on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I always thought that Mother was married here, but I may be wrong.
Now, when you were a very little girl, she did work for a time, didn't she?
Oh, brief.
Oh, I wondered if it had been down at the waterfront at all.
She didn't work
If she
here.
had
No,
worked
she
in the
worked
offices
New York.
at... Oh, I see.
Yeah, I think it was New York City,
Mm-hmm.
as a secretary,
Mhm.
private secretary. I think that she was so beautiful that she had a hard time as a secretary. It didn't last long.
The boss's wife probably wanted her to move on elsewhere, huh?
Right.
And then, when did your mother marry Mr. Steinschneider?
That's a good question.
Do you have any idea how old you were?
I'm just wondering if Mother got married here, first marriage, and second marriage in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I'm confused on that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't very old either at the time.
I was just trying to place when your mother married your father, Mr. Steinschneider, was he working at Zinsser Chemical then?
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Had he already been working there and living in Hastings?
Oh, yes.
I see. Okay. And I was just curious as to what his tenure was down there, if you had any idea. He worked there for as long as you could remember?
But I don't remember what that should come up in some interview during the war or something like that.
Okay.
Or when he was mayor. They would have a rundown on all that.
Of exactly what his title was there. Do you remember him coming home with stories about work or...
Chemical plants, during the war, of course, they were very, very busy making chemicals for the war, and they were very quiet. They didn't do much talking.
Now, do you mean World War I or World War II?
Two.
Right.
That was one I don't remember.
Right. But he was married to your mother in the 20s, was he? Or when you were growing up, when you were like 12 years old?
Possible.
I was just curious.
You really should be interviewing my sister. She had a very quick, sharp mind.
I was just curious, as a child, if you had much interaction with the place where your father worked. For example, did you go down there and visit him there?
No, you see, a chemical factory, you don't really bring kids down to see. Not even during the war. We just heard, he told me once that it was really hush-hush what they were making down there. There must have been some chemical of some sort for the war.
And this was World War II.
Yeah. They had pictures, which I always found interesting, they had pictures on the wall from Germany. And since it was the Germans that we were fighting, they were extremely valuable because it showed where plants were and where manufacturers were for bomb things.
Right.
So that was quite a contribution to our side for that.
When you were growing up, was Colonel Zinsser and the Zinsser family much of a presence in your life?
My mother's life, but not me. They lived over in the Zinsser house, and I don't think that there was much doing as socializing and that sort of thing. Everybody was deep in the war, and there isn't anything that I would remember that way.
You don't remember Colonel Zinsser in
Oh
particular?
yes, I know them. I also knew the daughters, but it was just once in a while. You know, it wasn't anything.
Wasn't an intimate kind of relationship.
No. Strictly business.
Now, you did go to school in Hastings, is that right?
Yes.
From the beginning straight through? Pardon me?
Kindergarten right up.
Right. Now, when you went to kindergarten in about 1916, where was that kindergarten?
That's in the old building.
On Farragut Avenue?
Yeah, the flatter one. I don't remember when the new edition came in, but we did have classes in it. I think maybe the last two years that I was here. You know, junior, senior year.
You told me a story earlier about how you walked to school.
Oh, the one that, Washington Avenue is a very high hill, and to walk up it in the wintertime was a little difficult, particularly after a snowstorm. We had to many a time dig ourselves out of the house here in order to go to school. I remember one very bad storm. The hill was very slippery and icy, and somebody had put on a pair of cleats and stayed at the brow of the hill, so that as everybody came up from the lower part and came to the top, they could reach out and haul them over the last part of it that was so slippery, so that they could continue on, to school.
Do you remember who that person was?
In Zeebrock, I don't know who it was.
Oh, tell me about some of your friends. Who do you remember from when you were little and growing up?
Well, mostly the senior class, we were stuck together pretty well, and we just visited Marjorie Flynn, Nick, I told you her name.
Right, yeah, it's her married name. She lives in Geneva now.
Yeah, and we reminisced quite a lot there.
Did Margie grow up in this neighborhood?
They were up in the manor.
I see.
Most of the friends we had lived in the manor.
They did.
Mm.
Now, when you were a little kid, do you remember when you were like 6, 7, 8, 9? Did you play more with neighborhood children then?
No, we had so much to keep us busy here, it seems.
Uh-huh.
For instance, I gave my mother a heart attack, I think, because we went sleigh riding. And we started from the top of our property, which is halfway up the hill, and came down across the lawn, over to the second lawn, and down to the brook.
Wow.
On a sled.
That's a pretty steep downhill to the brook, isn't
Very.
it? Yeah.
And the trees were very, very, though they're not as big as they are now, but once in a while you'd meet up with a tree on your way down.
Sounds like you were pretty gutsy.
Oh, we had a ball.
Uh-huh.
And we built a thing that was something that you could really sail over and down to the brook.
Mm-hmm.
It's, too bad we weren't skiing. It would have been a wonderful chance, but we only did sleighs.
So when you were that age, 6 up to 10 or 11, something like that, you played primarily with your brother and sister?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah. Because there was a lot. The woods in the back, we used to play Indians up among the trees in the back part of the woods. And sometimes the kids from the street would come in, but not too often.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were all at the same age, so we didn't really need to bring in younger kids.
Right, you were close.
And the Whaleys we knew,
Mm-hmm.
and I visited quite often.
Those children were your age. Mm-hmm.
And we saw Mary and Tootie Whaley, Mary Buck now, and Tootie's thing, and she had married and divorced and then remarried the same guy again, years later. I can't remember at the moment what their name is. It's in one of these.
Right. When you were growing up, were you very aware of the factories down on the waterfront? I mean, your father went there to work at the south end of the waterfront.
Yeah. You mean
you were-
Anaconda and all the other copper? No.
American Brass and...
No, because the workers all lived along that section close to the factories. They never had to travel very far.
Mm-hmm.
And
Some of them lived up this far in Washington, did they?
not too many of them. It was too far afield. Why buy a place or get into
Or
a house
rent,
up the
yeah.
hill so that you could have to
Walk
walk
up.
these in wintertime?
Right.
It made quite a difference.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the factory whistles?
Not like any other whistle.
Mm-hmm. You didn't just pay much attention to them?
No, there's one that used to give the hour, but lunchtime and then knockoff time, but
Mm-hmm.
otherwise there wasn't much.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very quiet factory noise,
Was it?
Just, it didn't, not a lot of hammering, and
Oh,
from here we wouldn't hear it so much
Yeah.
because we go up the valley.
right, and you were actually quite a distance away.
Yeah.
Were you conscious of the dirt much? The smoke, or was there that much?
No, I
Mm-hmm.
don't remember much smoke,
Mm-hmm.
but I imagine we would have to have a bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
But that all would be, the Zinsser would be down that end.
Mhm.
Wouldn't be up this end at all.
Mm-hmm. Or the pavement company was pretty...
Yes, and that's on the other end, you see, on the two sides, and then you
Mhm.
had the smaller ones in between
Mm-hmm.
factories. We used to sleigh ride down Washington Avenue.
Did you all the way down to the bottom?
I remember seeing somebody on a sleigh that it was coming lickety-split down, and at halfway point, Warburton Avenue comes across Washington Avenue,
Mm-hmm.
and the cars were just beginning to be known,
Mhm.
and you'd be up on the top of the hill and hope that no car was coming across the bridge. And this one guy went in, and he went in between the car wheels.
Wow.
It just timed it, so, and then on down to
Oh.
lower Warburton and Washington Avenue.
Mm-hmm. You used to do that long ride all the way from the top?
Oh, yeah.
It must have been very thrilling.
Mother didn't enjoy it.
I was going to...
She never would go out and watch us. But it was a beautiful, and we tried to learn to ski on barrel staves down Washington Street. But it was very steep.
Oh, it's a very steep hill, yeah. Now, do you remember shopping in the neighborhood stores at all when you were little?
Well, you had to go over the bridge.
Now, there were some markets
big-
right down here, were there?
Not many.
Mandrakes, or do you remember that?
I don't remember the names at all. But there weren't that many. And most of it was, for Raiolas, for the meat and the groceries. And you had to lug them home, so you were careful how much. Sometimes we could take a shortcut and go over where the library is, over on, is it Main Street?
Well, where the library is now?
No.
Oh, where it
No,
used to
no,
be,
where it
on
used
Main
to be,
Street,
that
yes.
gray,
It's now the firehouse.
yeah. And you could cut out the village that way and then come down Main Street and into the village itself. Or go over the bridge, about the same distance. But Mother used to walk through the woods and cross the brook and go over where the old library was, and then do any shopping that way. Or go to school.
She would do that rather than walk along...
Well, the bridge wasn't always there.
Right, okay. You mean,
That
when she
big
was
bridge.
young, I
Yeah,
see, yes. Yeah, that big bridge, I guess, was built in 1899.
Was it that?
But then actually it was small, and it wasn't enlarged, I think, until the 1920s.
They had to change it for traffic. And they had a little hand bridge over the brook to the library from our property. And we had rushes along the brook were brought in from England for the wheelwright factory that they had down below for shining, I guess it was. They're a big, long kind of a reed, and you can see them overseas, but they don't grow here normally. They have to be imported. So there's a whole hillside along the brook of these reeds that were used at the wheelwright factory over the brook that used the water in the little small pond down there, and which is now the Newington Park.
Right. Now, what were the reeds used for?
For shining or the wheels, I guess.
I see. Okay.
I never really did find out because I'd look at them, and say, well, I don't see how that could be enough to take any rough edges off. Or maybe it was some of the juice in the reeds that they used to polish. I don't know.
I see. Oh, that's interesting.
Every
I
once
hadn't
in a
heard
while-
anything about that before.
Once in a while I come across those reeds, and I know they're imported.
Do you remember Cotlett's Hotel or the Mud House? It was a
You mean down?
structure down in the ravine. Yeah.
Well, I don't know why it was built, really. I suppose there were factory workers.
Yeah, to
down
house
there.
workers, I guess. Yeah.
And I think the plan was that they were going to add more, but they never did. Thank goodness.
There were a number of structures in the ravine when you were fairly young.
Not too.
No?
They were planning to,
I see.
but they didn't. And you see that you could come from the main street in the village and cut down into the ravine. And if you lived there, of course, there was easy access to any job you had or to the factories.
Right.
And I assumed that they were going to build them for the factory workers.
Yeah.
But they never did get around to it.
Oh, do you remember who was planning to do that building? Or
No, this was long before Dad was mayor. And
we've tried to figure out actually if
1900 maybe, early 1900s. Or when they were bringing in people to work in the factories, may have been for the war.
yes,
First
World
war.
War I, right.
So I would think that was about the time.
We haven't been able to find any documentation that, the factory owners built housing specifically for workers. We don't know how some of the multifamily apartment buildings got built. They may have been built by the factory owners. We just don't know.
I think it was a project for the village
I see. Oh,
at that time.
to house the workers. We do have newspaper articles that tell us that there was a great shortage of housing for the workers and that they needed more boarding houses and more apartments and that kind of thing.
So they may have planned, you see, under the bridge, and add to it either side. But I don't know whether the land got sold or exactly what the story is.
Mm-hmm. Did you used to hear noise from the Mrs. Cotlett's place?
Not much,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that they were, I never bothered us
Mm-hmm.
particularly. No,
But there were a lot of people living in that structure.
well, too many.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or they had people visiting and,
Right.
constant changeover.
Mm-hmm. It was a
Um,
temporary stopping place, I think, for
Yeah,
a lot of people.
I really think that the factories we're going to build, in
Mhm.
the valley there for workers, be out of the way, and they had parking lot,
Mm-hmm.
no problem there and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But they never did.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember, as you were walking around your neighborhood when you were young, do you remember hearing people speaking other languages a lot?
Oh yes, the village is full of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have all from Europe and not much the English
Mm-hmm.
or Cockney, nothing like that particularly.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Irish, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And they all started coming into the States.
Right.
It depended what kind of work they were doing, if
Mhm.
they would be working along the river.
Mm-hmm. And the Irish seemed to, most of them or many of them came a little earlier. And
Whenever the potato famine was.
yeah, it was a lot
That would
earlier
bring it
than
in.
the
You
Polish
always
workers
see
came.
the Labiaks or families, a lot of them came from Ukraine.
Mhm.
A lot of them came from Poland.
Mm-hmm.
They were brought over. They had to have a sponsor. You couldn't just take an immigrant and bring them in.
Mhm.
You had to have a sponsor. And if the factories wanted to bring any workers in, they all had to have papers and everything for
Mhm.
it. Mother trained a lot of the girls from
Mhm.
these overseas families to be housemaids
Mhm.
and cooks,
Mm-hmm.
because if mother trained them, everybody knew that
They would do good
perfectly
work,
did,
yeah. Do you remember anything about any of those girls? Any stories that particularly...
Not really. Anna Labiak's name comes to mind.
Labiaks, that's a name I haven't heard before.
Well, what's his name? One who's done the movies.
Steve Zebrock?
Zebrock family.
Mhm.
And there was another one.
A girl named...
He was a wrestler.
Oh.
And I met him when I was working in a show in South America. I met him down there. He was doing a wrestling match. And I was surprised because, I didn't know much about what his work was or what he was doing. If I could only remember his name.
And the girl you remembered was Labiaks?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Labiak family,
Hmm.
Anna Labiak. She worked for Mother for quite a while.
A girl named Annie Warria.
Anna Warria. Oh yes.
Do you remember her?
Yeah.
Because we have a photograph that was recently given to the archive of Annie and two other people, and they were in a wedding party. The two girls in the photograph were bridesmaids, and they have these very fashionable outfits on.
Well, they always had the weddings in the special church.
Yes, St. Stanislaus.
Yeah. And well, Anna married a very handsome guy, Anna Labiak.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's gone. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
For a while they lived up near there.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's another family that lived on a hill part, who made quite a name for themselves. Now I remember seeing one of these in a TV show. He was an ensign in the show to a officer. The name of the officer was a famous movie star. I might get it later.
And the ensign was from Hastings?
Yeah, it was one of the Polish families
Oh,
down
really?
here. Yeah. He did quite well acting. After he'd given some of his wrestling.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any Irish? Windsor, do you know?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
They worked in all along the Hudson here, not on Dobbs Ferry or, or into New York. And many of them made good names for themselves.
Mm-hmm. You said earlier that, by the time you got to high school, that most of your friends were from Riverview Manor, and that's understandable because they would have been perhaps girls whose parents were professionals, as your parents were.
See, we were here before there even was a manor.
That's right,
here.
yeah.
And so who was to know how the village was going to spread?
Mm-hmm.
We had very nice people on the hill here. I was trying to think of one or two of the names. Kaufman?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you have it in one of these listings that you gave me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Foreman? One of the families.
They lived around here?
Yeah, on the avenue, Washington Avenue. I could go over the list probably and check it out with it later on.
Okay. And you remember the Russells you used to know Bill vaguely?
I can't quite place it.
Mm-hmm.
The name Russell, but I'm not too sure. Maybe it was Connie's class or something.
Frank Lynch.
Yes, I remember the
And
Lynches.
Jack Lynch. They lived across the street in the same house with the Russells.
They were up in the manor?
No, they were right across here.
They were in the
three-family house, yes.
Yeah, that's the White House across from the entrance.
Uh-huh.
Yes, yeah. But I, as I say, when I got out of school, I wasn't home much. I worked around the world.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky. I got in a show that went everywhere, so that a lot of them that may have graduated or gone into work in New York or something, I lost track of.
Mm-hmm.
I lost track of Marge Flynn, but I later came across her, you see, in upstate New York. Lydia McAdam was another girl from up in the hill, and she's died since. Well, it depends who was in your class, really.
Yes, sure.
It didn't depend whether you played or you knew them because they lived on the hill. It depended who was in your class that became your mates.
Mm-hmm. And your good friends, yeah.
And the Whaleys, they went their way, after they graduated from school. I lost track of them until just recently when we met Tootie and Mary down in Long Island. And
that must have been a nice reunion.
yeah, it was, because I hadn't seen them for a long time.
Uh-huh.
It's just fate, I think, with a lot of these, because since I was dancing and traveling that way, I never knew who I was going to bump into.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody might come to see the show, or somebody, might be in the audience or come backstage or something like that. The Finmians were from up there, and who did we meet recently on that? And I met them upstate. I didn't meet them down around here again. They came back into my life that way.
Mm-hmm. Was Isabel Steinschneider your stage name?
No. I took a family name, Cortelyu.
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 C-O-R-T-E-L-Y-O-U.
Okay. So French.
Uh-huh. And you were a dancer?
Yeah.
Did you study dance when you were growing up here in Hastings?
I was studying dancing, once a week or something like that. And then when I graduated, I really went into it very seriously because I loved it. And I studied with Albertina Roche in New York City, who was a very tough gal to study with. But she was putting people on Broadway with
How was her last name spelled?
R-A-S-C-H.
Uh-huh.
Roche.
Uh-huh.
Albertina was her first name. And if you got in with her, you were pretty well set for any jobs.
Mm-hmm. Now, you were too young to be performing at the time when Ziegfeld had his Follies, but at that time, had you been aware of that with special interest?
Oh, yes. Loved the idea of having him in the village, and he would have Broadway shows brought up and in his theater and have them show in Ziegfeld Estate.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember seeing those?
One or two.
Uh-huh.
But Connie got interested in the theater, and she studied in New York for drama. And since I had been dancing since knee-high to a grasshopper, I was interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, I started traveling, so I sort of left the nest, right after school.
Yes.
Never did meet anybody from Hastings there, who was in the theater, but I know there were plenty of them.
Mm-hmm. Who was your dancing teacher in Hastings? Nothing that you read?
It was, Kozlov.
Oh, now he was the ballet master of the Metropolitan Opera.
Mm-hmm. And he lived down in...
Pinecrest Parkway?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it was Parkway, but...
or Pinecrest Drive, I guess
yes,
the house
he
is
had
on.
a studio there, and I worked with him while I was in school. And he had classes.
Uh-huh. Patricia Ziegfeld-Stevenson said that her parents, packed her off to go to classes with him, but that it became very clear very quickly that she had two left feet and she had absolutely no talent. So she said she only took a very few classes, and then they just said the heck with that. But you studied with him for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Ballet.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, Albertina Rush in New York was the one to study with in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I went down every day.
Mm-hmm. Did Mr. Kozlov have many students from Hastings?
If he did, I don't know.
Oh, you don't?
No, because I can't remember whether it was a large class or whether I had private.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as I graduated, I went to, I broke away and went into New York to study.
Mm-hmm.
But probably because I studied a short time with him is why I got a lot of jobs.
Mm-hmm. Because you could put him on your kind of resume and use. Oh.
But I'm terribly lucky. I think I was born at the right time, the right age, because in the theater in New York, it's not like it is now. Everything's for TV work, or else not too many shows coming in. I noticed a lot of new theaters in Broadway, but it didn't seem like it always was. However, they had the like the Capitol Theater in New York or Paramount Theater, and in those there was a movie, and you went to see a movie. Then you had a show in between the movies, and you did 5 shows a day.
Wow.
And a lot of times when you were finished working the show, you were down rehearsing for the next change of the show. As a result, there were a lot of people to choose from. They needed a lot of dancers. And I didn't care. I didn't do any solo particularly. I just liked to dance, and if I could get the show that was dancing and traveling, I was in.
Great.
I was very lucky.
And you did that all around the world? Wonderful.
Well, you see, these shows would, then we started, when I was working on Broadway, they started exchange shows like Les Girls. Well, they first started that kind of dancing show. French would bring in a show and be on Broadway, and the Americans would retaliate and go over to Paris. So that it also gave jobs that had never been there before.
That's interesting. Getting back here to your father as mayor, do you remember anything during those years when he was mayor? Did he bring home any of the problems that he felt were facing the village and discuss them?
He might have talked to Mother about it, but he didn't talk to us.
But it wasn't a big part of what you would remember.
No.
Well, you were
I suppose during the war you had to be very careful.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And with all the different nationalities in Hastings,
Mm-hmm.
you had to be extra careful.
Yeah.
I remember we had a little dachshund here, and he was adorable. But because he was a German dog, some of the kids really took it out on him.
Wow.
You know, they'd be walking to school, and the dog would be out near the gate, and
Hmm.
it was a shame.
This
So-
is when you were very little, so it must have been
No, this is when the war.
World War II.
Yeah.
But now you graduated from high school in 1929.
And I immediately went into professional dancing.
Yeah, so you would have been actually long gone by the time World War II started,
Yeah.
but you came back to visit?
I think I was living in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I got married in 42? 41? Something
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Right, so you
The first
come
marriage.
up. Mm-hmm.
And, I always have to come back to Hastings,
Mm-hmm.
no matter where I've been. And the war, I taught first aid in Hastings for the war.
Mm-hmm.
I trained office workers, people in the factories, anything for first
Oh.
aid in case of a bombing and
Oh.
that type of thing.
I see.
I
That's
was
interesting.
head of that.
Mm-hmm. But you never actually returned to live here?
No, I lived in New
Full
York
time.
City most
Uh-huh.
of the time.
Uh-huh.
And then after the war, I left the theater, and I was very lucky to get a job at Hammacher Schlemmer
Mm-hmm.
on 57th Street.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed there for until almost recently.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for about 25, 30 years.
I see. Before you moved to New Zealand?
Mm.
Oh. Oh. You worked in an office there?
No, I did a little of everything. Mrs. Schlemmer and I got along very nicely. And I had carte blanche, and I was a good salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
But,
That's such a wonderful store.
well, that was it.
It's a
And
fabulous
the
store.
clientele.
Yes.
You know, you had people from England.
All over.
My favorite was the Duchess of Argyll. She was wonderful.
Uh-huh.
But you had people from Fifth Avenue and Park Avenue,
Sure. Oh,
and they were great.
that's quite an experience.
It was a place, really, there where everybody who was anybody, movie stars or not,
Yes.
they came in.
Yes. Do you remember anything special about school or your teachers?
Oh, they were all fantastic. They were really good teachers, not like you've got now.
Uh-huh.
Oh, you know, Smith and Pingree.
Yes.
She was fantastic. What else? At the moment, I
Did you
can't
have
think.
Miss Jones?
No,
Mm-hmm.
not that I remember. Our gym teacher was a man. What was his name? And very likable. And I thought at that time that I would be going in as a gym teacher
Mm-hmm.
and study, to teach it,
Mhm.
because I was in athletics a lot. And he gave me a lot of pointers, and I used to take over some of the basketball games and referee and that sort of thing, which was fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I never did. I was dancing instead.
Now, that's interesting. This was in the early 20s, and sports for girls was a prominent feature of life at Hastings High School.
Well, the schools all vied against each other, so you
Mhm.
went, your basketball games were always with Dobbs Ferry, Irvington, Tarrytown, all the way up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a league,
Mm-hmm.
and you played up and down the Hudson.
Mm-hmm.
That was good. Particularly when the boys' team was playing at the same time.
Did you play tennis?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I enjoyed tennis. I would love to continue it, but I had a broken ankle, so I don't go out on the courts.
Were you on other teams besides the basketball team at school? Was there a
Well,
girls' tennis
it
team?
was tennis, yeah.
Mhm.
And Magellan, or Madeline Murphy, was the one who used to coach that.
Mm-hmm.
but she was still a student, and later went on to be a coach or whatever.
Oh.
What else? I wish I could remember half the names.
I think you're doing very well, really. Some people have told us that during the 1920s and the 30s, that the school would have sponsored outings and things, or even assemblies, that you had to pay to go to an assembly at school, and that
Depended whether you were in the audience or whether you were on
right,
stage.
if you were in the audience,
Yeah.
but that a lot of the factory children couldn't pay, and
Too
that's
poor.
right, and that sometimes children from other families, their mother would give them an extra dime or an extra quarter to pay for someone who didn't have the money to go. Do you remember anything about that?
If it was happening, we
Right.
were told.
Yeah.
No.
It just wasn't something that some people may have really paid any attention to, too.
No, as far as I know, everything was equal.
Mm-hmm.
I have no recollection of anything like that. I wouldn't know.
Were you in the same class with Andy Kissel? No, he may have been just a little bit younger, I guess.
No, I don't know.
He was.
No.
He's someone we interviewed for the Oral History Project.
I remember coming home one day from playing basketball or working out, and I was late for dinner. And Dee and Bobby were quite young.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, having been using, basketball, I was quite tired, and the water was on the table, and I took a drink of it. And they put perfume in the water.
Oh, no.
Devils.
Right, that's
And for years, I couldn't use perfume.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh.
I never did it.
Oh.